I did the around the world flight, then I did 7 continents, and then the next goal that popped up, and I wrote a book about it, and the next goal that popped up was flying over the North Pole. And so I did that in 2018 from northern Canada across the pole to the Svalbard Islands in Norway. That wasn't my longest flight, but I think that was the most interesting one. And I wasn't talking to anybody the whole way. There's no radio communications.
All right, you're listening to Hawk Talk. I'm here today with Harry Anderson. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So again, I assume the day you're born, come out, immediately jump in the left seat and fly out of there, and you're off to the races, flying around the world, correct?
Well, not really. I'm a Midwestern kid, born into a family with 6 kids, in fact. Yeah, we moved around a lot when I was growing up. And
where were you in that order? What number were you?
Third. Yeah, oldest boy. Yeah, we moved around a lot when I was growing up, and at one point we were living in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I had a morning paper route. Yeah. And you get up at 5 a.m., collect the papers, roll them, but Cheyenne in the winter is not that friendly a place, and so you think about 11-year-old kid walking down the middle of the street, frigid temperatures, the wind's blowing. And I've had occasion to think back on that and say, well, that probably gave me some resilience, some strength that I've drawn upon for the things I've done later. But beyond that, I had a pretty conventional background in education, engineering degree at the University of UC Santa Barbara, in fact.
You guys.
So I had to start as an engineering career, but eventually morphed into doing more adventurous things.
Yeah. I actually grew up in Ojai, so not too far from UCSB. And tell me more about your parents. Were they adventurous people? Were they engineers? Like what were you brought up around?
Yeah, my father was. So my father was a broadcast engineer, and in fact, he became VP of engineering at KCET there in Los Angeles when we finally moved to the Los Angeles area. So that's
how old were you when you moved?
13 or 14. I remember I went to high school, maybe 1 year of junior high, but high school in La Crescenta Valley High.
Nice.
I don't know if we ever played you guys in football.
High school, I went to a tiny hippie school at Ohio. We did not have a football team. We were 42 kids in the entire high school.
That's rare. I think we had 1,800 kids in our high school.
Exactly.
But anyway, so I spent formative years growing up in California. And after I got my engineering degree from Santa Barbara, I went up to take a job with a small consulting firm in San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah. And what kind of engineering did you study?
Electrical engineering. But my specialty was always wireless communications. And eventually I went on to get a master's degree and a PhD in electrical engineering with a specialty in wireless communications.
And where was that initial interest? I mean, at 18 years old, what drove you? Was it because of your father, or what drove you to be
I think that's a lot of it. That seemed to be the easy downhill course. I'd grown up with Morse code. He's a ham radio operator. I was a ham when I was a young kid, and I grew up with Morse code as part of the soundtrack of my childhood. So, so it seemed like a logical, well-paying career. It didn't feel like a wide open choice, really, but he didn't push me into it. I chose it. So that's what I ended up doing.
Nice. And so you graduate, you get this job up in the Bay. First off, how was your experience there? Like, what was it like? Now you're like, I got this degree. I wanted to be in engineering. I always love to hear about what was your experience versus perception of what it was going to be like?
Well, I can tell you after 3 years, I'd had enough. What I really came to realize is that after 3 years, I was never going to get to do the things that I wanted to do with 2-week annual vacations.
Yep.
And that was sort of the norm in those days. And so I actually took a year's leave of absence from my job. And I traveled all over the world. Hitchhiked, I flew to Africa first, toured around game parks, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I hitchhiked alone from Nairobi down to Cape Town and back.
How'd you afford to do that?
It was cheap. I had money saved up from my time doing the engineering job, but it was fairly cheap to travel that way, to hitchhike, and plane tickets were cheap if you could find them. And then I spent the balance of the year living in the south of France for a while and touring all over Europe. So for me, and as I look back on, that was 1975. And in fact, this year is the 50th anniversary of the year of independence. And when I look back on it now, it was absolutely pivotal into what became of my life after that.
It reminds me of that anecdote of the fisherman where it's like, well, you could turn this into a business and you could hire more fishing, but the fisherman that goes out and fishes every day. It's like, you turn this into a business, get more boats, catch a bunch of fish. And the guy goes, then what? And he's like, well, then you could get a whole fleet and you could, make even more money getting a bunch of fish. He's like, and then what? He's like, and then you could bring on private equity and start buying up fishing conglomerates all over the world. And then what? Well, then you could own the fishing industry for the entire world and be the richest guy in fishing. He goes, and then what? He's like, then you could sell it and retire. He goes, then what? He's like, then you could just fish all day. And the guy goes, interesting.
It comes full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. See, because you were saying, like, I went around hiking Kilimanjaro, was being on safari and spending in the south of France. I'm like, I feel like I know a lot of people that are aiming for retirement to do that exact same thing.
Yeah, I was lucky to be able to do it at 25. And so, and it's really a much better time for that kind of experience because you still have a lot of energy, curiosity. You're not really burdened with medical issues and all the things that happen later in life. And so I think the 20s is really the right time to do travel and discover who you are and what you're good at and what you want to do.
Yeah. And were you already into flying at that point? Like, when did you start the interest?
No, I didn't take up flying until much later.
Okay. We'll get to that then.
Okay.
So you spent a year traveling around, you said, correct?
Right.
Then what happened?
Well, I went back to the same job I had. They were gracious enough to keep my position open for me. So
why go back though if you hated it so much?
Well, it was comfortable to sort of get my feet back on the ground after traveling. Yeah. I didn't really hate it so much as I was bored with it. Yeah. It just wasn't as stimulating as I would like to have it. And so I worked there for a few more years and then for another company for about a year and a half. And then I went into business for myself, first as a consulting engineer and later building a software company. I started in 1985 and built up over 15 years and sold in 2000 at the peak of the tech boom then.
Nice. Awesome. Timed it right. And what you said you went back to school. When was that period of going back?
Well, that was when I moved up to Eugene, Oregon, and I got my master's degree at Oregon State then. And while I was still living in Eugene, I got a general manager to run my software business. And I took 2 years to get a PhD in engineering at the University of Bristol in Great Britain.
So what drove you to do that? Why did you already running? It sounds like a business that was paying the bills that you were enjoying. What drove you to feel like you needed your PhD?
It's partly credibility, partly because I was interested in things that was just, intellectually important, but also in terms of the kinds of software we had. It was all high-level engineering software for designing wireless networks. And so having a PhD, the CEO, founder of the business, having a PhD gave me a lot of business credibility in terms of what we were trying to sell.
Yep, makes sense. And so you built that business. Tell me more about that business. What was it like? How big was it? How many people were working there at the peak?
Yeah, it was in the scheme of things, it was a small business, very specialized. And at the peak, there was about 15 people working.
Okay, nothing wrong with that.
It's a multi-million-dollar business, but 15 people, and compared to today's scale of things, it was a tiny, tiny business, but financially very successful, and that's what made a difference to me.
Well, and I think also the exposure is part of that too. Like scale has gotten crazy, let's be real, but also like I actually just saw a stat on like it was the wealthiest people. I'm gonna see if I can find this. I took a screenshot. Here it is. This was, I think 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, was like the wealthiest people in the world. And like Bill Gates was number one at 66 billion.
Yeah.
I think Larry Ellison was at like 400 billion. It's like 10 years later. It is crazy how much the wealth has trickled to the top in that sense. Not to get, it shouldn't be political. It's a fact. But same thing with the scale of some of these companies. I think it's 7 companies are propping up our entire economy right now.
Yeah. When I sold my business back in 2000, a $1 billion company was a rare company.
Right.
And so, yeah, you're right. It's just really escalated.
Yeah, now with AI, companies are getting valued at that to start, which is just absurd. But to your point, building a company that you run for 15 years and enjoy doing and build a great lifestyle off of, nothing wrong with that. And then when you sold it, was the desire to do something else, to free yourself up? Why did you get out of it?
Yeah, it was really that, to free myself up. It felt like crossing the finish line and throwing your hands up and saying, "Hooray, I've won." You know, I mean, that's the night the papers were finally signed, the money transferred, etc. I got the best night of sleep I'd had in years, it seemed like. So yeah, it was really, I mean, it's a burden, and it's a burden to run a company, to be successful, to manage the employees. It builds up on you without you really realizing it, and you're actually free yourself of it, and then you know how much effort you had put into it.
Oh yeah. I've been 12 years at this, and this is my 5th company. So everything you're saying resonates a lot. And I agree. I think that I would find if I didn't do it, I'd be in a very, you'd realize all the impact that it has. And I work hard to try to minimize the negative impacts of the stress that's involved with running a business. So did you have an idea of what you wanted to do next? Or was it just
and one thing I did actually is just from the business standpoint is that the company that bought us was a publicly traded company, a NASDAQ company. And of course, after that tech boom, everything started to fall apart in the tech world after 2000. And I actually bought the company back for 6% of what I sold it for, along with some partners. And the partners were the people, my former employees that had been running the business in my absence. And so I was back in as half owner of the business, but I wasn't spending time running it. So it sort of was still taking advantage of what was possible with that business without.
Was that basically the tech dust thing? You sold it at the top and then everything went.
Yeah, and then we bought it back in 2004.
Okay,
3 years later.
This story always seems brilliant. It's like run a business, sell it at the peak. They all screw it up. You bring it back. You do it. I have a friend that's done that 3 times to the tune of over $1 billion, and it's just crazy how that can work out.
It can happen. Yeah, I mean, when the stock market just crashed at that point, they were desperate for any little bit of EPS they could get, and since they already wrote off the investment, they were willing to sell it cheap to get some cash in the door.
Got it. And so how long did you take, as you said, you weren't operating it, but how long did you own it for the second time?
Yeah, I continued to own it. I sold the last bit of it actually in 2022, the last 10%. So I owned 50, 60% through 2019. So nice. I owned it for quite a while after that, and it grew right back to where it was before. So with the other people running it. So it's still a great little business.
Yeah. Awesome. And so, again, not having an operator, what did you start doing with your time? I just feel like most entrepreneurs, people that have built like you, and the things you have said, I assume you don't sit around very often.
Yeah, well, that's what freed me up to actually get serious about flying. So you asked before when I got my pilot's license in 1998. So right before. Late in life compared to a lot of people.
Yeah, I have mine as well, by the way.
Oh, you do? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So in 1998, and after I sold the business, I had time to get more serious about flying, get my instrument rating, multi-engine rating, all that stuff, and start flying around all over the country and eventually overseas in a better plane. So.
And how did you look at was it just straight hobby, or did you find ways to make it productive in some sense, or was it really like, I love this, I'm just going to go check out this new place in the Midwest or whatever? And
it was more about inventing challenges. I really don't ever say I love flying. That emotion just doesn't seem to fit. But I like the challenge of it. So I started setting goals for myself that were sort of arbitrary. Like in 2004, I guess it was. I said I'm going to fly to the airports which are the farthest north, south, east, and west in the United States. Uh-huh. And so you go up to Minnesota, you go out to Eastport, Maine, down to Key West, and there's one up here close to where I am in Washington State, which is the farthest west. And in the course of doing that, I ended up landing in over half the states. And the year after that, I took on the challenge to fly to the Cayman Islands.
Good question. What were you flying on for that first challenge?
What was I flying?
Yeah, what type of plane?
Yeah, it was an Archer II, Piper Archer II. So a very forgiving airplane. A good airplane to, actually I learned on a very similar airplane to that. And so, that was my first airplane that I flew for about 1,000 hours. And I also flew it down to the Cayman Islands. I flew it up to Alaska. So I was setting goals for myself, and I didn't realize at the time that I was actually preparing myself for these longer international flying adventures.
And I was going to ask that. So, I mean, flying from the Northwest to Maine to Minnesota to Florida, like on a plane like that, I mean, that was weeks, I assume.
Yeah.
And so, how did you keep interested, entertained attentive during those periods where you're flying for hours and hours and hours over cornfields or whatever it is? Like, what was it about it that kept you excited? Because you did it again. So it wasn't like you did.
Oh, yeah, I kept doing it.
Yeah,
there must have been something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, people ask me that question a lot. Don't you get bored just sitting there looking out the window? And I don't. And I think it's interesting because people have gotten so used to external stimuli of all kinds, music, videos, internet, whatever it is, that the idea of just sitting there by yourself at peace with your own thoughts seems bizarre.
Yep.
But it isn't bizarre to me. It's refreshing in a way. So I've done that a lot, both flying and sailing, that I'm just out there on my own and, at peace with what I'm doing. And I enjoy the scenery, certainly. Part of flying over the country in a small plane like that, you can look out and you can see real life happening. You can see farmers plowing their fields. You can see kids getting on school buses. You can see all this stuff up close that you can't see from a commercial airliner. So it's interesting that way.
For that first flight, what altitude were you generally flying at?
It would have been around 7,000 or 8,000 feet, I think.
As you said, you can see a lot from there. And so, as you said, it led you to wanting to go international. So talk to me about like that progression. Like you achieved that first achievement. Were you then hooked? Like, as you said, you didn't love flying, but were you addicted to the achievement side of it?
Yeah, to the accomplishment of it.
Yeah.
Just feeling like I took on something difficult and there's a lot of satisfaction to it. The transition to international really was sort of a bizarre event that I had this worker come to the house that I was living in at the time in Eugene, Oregon, installing something. I forget what it was, plumbing something or other. And I mentioned I was a pilot, and he mentioned that his father had flown his Bonanza to Europe. And I said, really? You can do that? And I started looking at it, researching it, and said, well, yeah, I can see how that's completely possible. And at that point, it really got me. I've always been interested in international travel, more than 100 countries over the last 50 years. And now the plane just gave me a new vehicle, a new avenue for adventures that I couldn't have any other way. And so I sold the Archer and bought the Lancair Columbia 300, which is much faster, much longer range. Mm-hmm. And that's what I use for all my international flights. And I still have that plane. That's what I fly now.
What was your first international flight?
So the Archers, in the Archer, I went out to the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands. But in the Lancair, the first big flight was going up to Goose Bay, Canada, and flying across Greenland to Reykjavik, Iceland. That was like 1,300 nautical miles. And so that was the first major long flight leg I did internationally. And then it just continued on from there.
Nice. And I was going to say, did you go from Reykjavik? Do you keep going from there? How do you get in a smaller plane over to Europe?
So that's how you do it. And in fact, if you've got less range than my Lancair has, then you would stop in Greenland to refuel. So go Goose Bay to Greenland. Actually, stop both sides of Greenland, East Coast to Reykjavik, Reykjavik to the Faroe Islands to Scotland, and then you're in Europe. So that's how you do it.
I've taken a larger plane that had to do Maine to Ireland because it could not make it into Europe. And we had to get as close to Europe as, in the US side of it as possible. So we did Maine to Ireland. So I've done that crossing. And so once you did that, like, how did you start thinking about how you wanted to progress in this? Did you look at like what the biggest pilots, the most adventurous pilots had done and you wanted to start beating people, or like, where did you start coming up with your next challenge?
Well, I became aware of this group, earthrounders.com, and I didn't know about them until I started researching the flight to Europe. And I said, okay, well, flying around the world, that's a worthwhile goal. And so, getting to Europe was really just the start of that flight that took me all the way around the world and back home again. And after I did that, I said, well, going around the world is fine, but I really want to be one of the few people that has also flown solo to all 7 continents. Yep. And so that's what I started planning as soon as I got home. How do I do that? How do I fly to South America and Antarctica? Yep. And after that, it just were more goals that were interesting to me.
Well, at that time, like bigger planes, if someone with a lot of money could have taken a Gulfstream or something, made it down there, et cetera. So I guess those aren't solo flights. Was there an aspect of it that it was like part of the criteria was that it was a single engine plane, or like what was?
Yeah, I think, I was the 5th person to fly solo to all 7 continents. And the others were all in single engine planes, in fact, smaller planes than mine. And so I'm not sure the size of plane makes a difference. I think solo makes a difference.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, yeah.
Because you could do, I mean, you want to get fancy, you could do a Pilatus and have a pretty luxurious experience going around.
And people have flown Pilatus around the world. And, that's all fine. That's a single engine plane. So.
Right. That could be. And so I flew one last week. That's why that's fresh. And and so that became the big achievement. Was that after you flew international and did around the world once? That was what you wanted to do?
So I did the around the world flight. Then I did 7 continents. And then the next goal that popped up, and I wrote a book about it. And the next goal that popped up was flying over the North Pole. And so I did that in 2018 from northern Canada across the pole to the Svalbard Islands in Norway. That wasn't my longest flight, but I think that was the most interesting one, in that I wasn't talking to anybody the whole way. There's no radio communications. I asked for a frequency, and when I took off from Canada, I said, who should I be talking to? And they said, well, nobody. You can broadcast and clear if you want, but nobody's going to answer. So yeah, that was a very interesting flight. Being able to look down.
How long was that flight, for context? How long did you fly without any contact to anyone?
Yeah, 10 and a half hours was the total. Wow. A little over 1,600 nautical miles. And in fact, when I got to Longyearbyen in the Svalbard Islands, I called him about 50, 60 miles out on VHF, and he didn't know I was coming. He said, who are you? So you got this oddball plane coming down from the North Pole. And they claimed they never got the flight plan from Canada. And so when I got on the ground in Longyearbyen, I had to call Canada and close the flight plan, because they wouldn't have known otherwise. And they assured me that the Norwegians had the flight plan. So there was some screw up that way. But it's pretty interesting when you're flying 10 hours over the North Pole and you call the airport on the radio and they have no idea who you are.
Just Santa Claus is real. Just out of nowhere, coming from the North Pole.
I mean, they weren't going to deny me landing or anything like that. But it was just
But if it was a busy airport, it could have caused a little kerfuffle.
Yeah.
But okay, and so how long did it take you to hit all 7 continents when you did that flight?
So the first round the world flight was in 2011 and took 3 months total of flying, really. And then the flight down to Antarctica, that took about a month to fly down all the way to the tip of South America.
And when you say a month, did you stop in certain places for a week and hang out, or how did you structure these trips?
I usually, some places I wanted to stop for, a few days, like Iguazu Falls in Argentina.
Yeah, beautiful spot.
Yeah. And so there were places that to me were interested to wait for a few days to tour around. Other stops were just fuel stops. Just a few stop for fuel, stop overnight to rest, and then continue on. And I actually built spreadsheets for all these flights. And so I had built a spreadsheet for when I would get to Punta Arenas in southern Chile, in Tierra del Fuego. And I got there exactly the day the spreadsheet said. So it was good planning or dumb luck. I don't know which, but it doesn't often work out that way. But as you well know, I mean, the weather really sets the agenda in many ways.
Right. And so to hit every continent, did you have an achievement to take it a step up beyond that? What was the next?
Yeah, I mean, really the North Pole was the next one after that. And then the final thing was another lap, but going westbound around the world this time. Okay. And that flight took me to some unusual places that small planes very rarely go. And that's across Russia into China, Kazakhstan, through Central Asia, just some really oddball places. And again, it was just for the uniqueness of making a flight like that. And
did you hit any challenges landing in all these places, or any weird, I don't want to say geopolitical, but just foreign nation stuff?
Not really. I never felt like there was a political.
Yeah, that's why I didn't mean it that way. I meant just more foreign culture, like a random American just landing with a tiny plane all along our country. Was there anything like that?
No, I felt welcome. Places. The only technical issue I ever had that stopped me was a flat tire on my plane in Hohhot, China.
Yeah.
I was taxiing out for takeoff. The plane was fine on pre-flight, but I was taxiing out for takeoff and it started veering off to the right I couldn't keep it straight on the taxiway. And of course, I called the tower. I stopped sideways on the taxiway, and I called the tower and told them, I think I have a flat tire. And they freaked out. And then when I shut down the engine and got out of the plane, they double freaked out. It was a fairly busy regional commercial airport. So they had to put a ground stop on all their departing commercial flights because I was in the taxiway. And it took a week of screwing around. And they were all helpful trying to get me on my way again. But it still took a week to get the parts and get, the logistics of getting the flat tire fixed before I could get going again.
And go week to, as you said, weather's normally the thing, but having technical issues. So with all these flights, your only real technical issue was a flat tire once?
Yes.
That's incredible. During my instruction, I had one emergency landing, one urgent landing in just
really
50 hours. Yeah.
Were engine failures or
3 out of 6 spark plugs fail. I learned on a 172.
Why?
And we had spark plugs failing, so we lost power and started descending, not because we wanted to. And I was in the corridor above LAX.
Oh, wow.
And so we had Torrance. We were just going down to Torrance to do some touch and goes and then come back. And we just were able to glide into Torrance, but had them clear the pattern for us.
Sure.
And then I had, the other one wasn't that big a deal. We lost our alternator pretty much right after takeoff, like at, 5 minutes or something. So I just turned around. We had about 30 minutes of battery left, but I was brand new. I was like, is this normal?
Well, I can tell you that, flight school planes get a lot of heavy usage. And that's really what that's about. When you own your own plane and you're 100% in charge of the maintenance and all the rest, then you can have a lot more confidence in what you're flying.
Yep, totally agree. Well, that's incredible. And so after and West generally is a lot slower too, correct? You've got the Gulfstream.
You get debates among Earth-rounder pilots whether East or West is faster or slower. The people that hold records for flying around the world, speed records, have gone westbound generally.
Huh. Okay.
And that intuitively you wouldn't think that, but that's been the case. So I personally know a couple of people that have speed records for westbound circumnavigations. So.
Yeah, I guess if you're not hitting the Gulf Stream, it's not going to affect you as much. But and so you said that was a big celebratory last adventure that you had?
Yeah, that was the last flying adventure. After I finished that one, I said, I'm really satisfied with what I've accomplished in terms of long distance flying. So that's why I turned my attention to a new kind of adventure.
Which, tell me more.
Sailing.
Really? And so what have been let's talk about, in what year was this that you did that last flight?
So the last flight I did westbound was in 2019, just before the pandemic. And I'd actually thought before, when I was writing the book about the flying, the book called Flying 7 Continents Solo, I was writing that in 2015, and it occurred to me that if I were to sail solo to all the continents, I'd be the first person to do both. And I'd sailed for years. I had a boat up here in Puget Sound, and I thought, well, sailing is really a lot of work. It's really physically demanding compared to flying. And you're also much more exposed to weather because you're out there longer. You're just going slower. And the plane, of course, as you know, if you can easily outfly bad weather, you can fly around bad weather. And if the weather's really bad, you just stay on the ground, wait for a better day, right? You can't do any of that with the boat. Once you're out there, you take what comes. And so thinking all these things through, in 2015, I dismissed the idea of sailing to 7 continents. But fast forward 5 years, and I resurrected the idea for a couple of reasons. One was the fact that I finished the international flying I wanted to do, but also it was a pandemic year. And so I'm sitting around like everybody else, twiddling my thumbs at home, trying to think of something interesting to do. So I resurrected the idea. I started planning the voyage and finally got going in 2022 with this voyage to 7 continents.
And what was your path? Where did you go from to?
So I ordered a new boat that was built in France. I had it delivered to the East Coast of Baltimore. I finished the outfitting there, and I left October or August of 2022. And went eastbound to Europe as the first continent, then touched Africa at Tangiers, then packed across the Atlantic for a second time to Brazil, and down the coast of Brazil to Tierra del Fuego, which is the stepping off point to go to Antarctica. So I did that at the end of January 2023, and then back again and took a few months break at home, and then started off across the Pacific to French Polynesia, Tahiti, Tonga, Australia as a 5th continent. and then on to Indonesia as the Asian continent landing, and then across the Indian Ocean around the tip of South Africa, and across the Atlantic for the third time back to the United States as the North American landing.
Did you land on the East Coast, or did you go through Panama and?
No, I did. I skipped all of that. I mean, that would be the normal way people would sail around the world, is go through the Panama Canal and across the Pacific. But by going, hey, I needed to go to Antarctica, so that's why I went down the east coast of South America to get down there.
And so it took you total, like, because you took a break. So how long from when you started to when you finished?
Yeah, it was 2.5 years.
Okay.
So I finished in Fort Lauderdale January of this year. So started August 2022, January 2025.
Yeah. And did you do this all by yourself, solo?
Yeah, that was the whole point. So the flying had to be solo, and to match that, the sailing had to be solo as well.
And you are the first and only person to have done that on both a plane and a boat.
As far as I know. I mean, I don't know what sailors have done. I mean, solo sailors have been sailing all over the place for a long time.
But the sailor that's also done it on an airplane is the...
Yeah, that's the limiting factor, because the other pilots, there's just only a handful of other solo pilots that have gone to all the continents. I know who they are, and none of them are offshore sailors. Yeah. And so that pretty much sets the limitation. So that's the main reason I think I'm the only one that's done both.
Well, I got a couple more questions for you. Number one, what's next?
So the boat is currently on the East Coast in a boatyard in Chesapeake Bay. Yep. And I want to bring it back to my home cruising ground here in the Pacific Northwest. And the most interesting way to do that is through the Northwest Passage. And so that's what I'm planning right now, is to take the boat up to Greenland and then across northern Canada through what is now an open passage for a few months during the summer when the ice is melted. Normally it's closed off with ice, and it wasn't that many years ago that it was impossible to get through there. But it's now feasible in small boats, and I was just watching a couple that went through this year. And so, it's certainly possible. And as I say, the most interesting way to get the boat back to the Pacific Northwest is going that direction.
Yeah. Awesome. And so last question for you, for someone else that, has a dream of achieving great things and, sort of leaving their mark, what's one piece of advice you either did get or wish you got that led you to go for it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I was fairly risk averse until I took that year off and started hitchhiking around, doing all that stuff on my own. I think I was just going to be another nerd engineer. And, that was sort of the track I felt I was on. And it really took that kind of, shock event, if you will, to convince me I could do other things. And so that's really what I would tell people. And I tell people now, I meet young pilots from time to time, and I give them that advice as well. You don't have to stick on any particular path. You can really spread your vision much, much broader than that, and what you're interested in doing, what you're able to achieve.
Amen. Well, Harry, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on Hawk Talk.
Well, yeah, I appreciate the invitation.